What if the woman scrubbing tray tables at 35,000 feet could speak 6 languages? What if she wasn't just a cleaner, but a forgotten scholar, a buried voice from the Middle East, a woman with a mind sharp enough to negotiate billion-dollar deals? If only someone gave her a seat at the table. And what happens when that chance comes, not in a boardroom, but mid-air? In a moment no one saw coming. When Layla Al-Masri answered a phone call in Arabic on a transatlantic flight, she thought she was just being polite. But on the other end of the line was a Middle Eastern billionaire, and standing behind her was the CEO who had never looked her in the eye until that moment. What happens when a woman the world tried to keep invisible suddenly becomes indispensable? Will they accept her rise, or try to drag her back into the shadows she escaped from? And, more importantly, will Layla have the courage to claim her name, her power, and a future that was never meant for her, but now refuses to exist without her? If stories like this move you, stories of power reclaimed, silence broken, and identity rediscovered, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Because what you're about to hear is not just a story, it's a revolution that began with a single phone call. Now, let's begin. The hum of jet engines blended with the soft clicks of heels on carpet as the final passengers boarded Flight 714 from New York to Abu Dhabi. In the narrow galley between business and first class, Layla Morgan crouched quietly, wiping down the edge of a fold-out tray no one would notice. Her movements were practiced, gentle but efficient. She had a way of moving that made her nearly invisible, and that's exactly how she liked it. Wearing her standard Atlantic Skies Navy uniform, not the polished blue of flight attendants, but the plain cotton one reserved for the in-flight cleaning crew, Layla blended into the background like the texture of the walls. The passengers never looked her in the eye. Most thought she was part of airport staff. Some assumed she didn't speak English. That suited her just fine. From where she stood, she could see Gate 17 slowly pulling away, the jet bridge retracting like a receding tide. The doors were sealed. The sky outside was slowly shifting from steel gray to twilight orange. She checked her watch. 14 hours in the air ahead, 2 meal services, 3 cabin refreshes, 5 trips to collect forgotten scarves, water bottles, or earbuds. And likely a dozen small humiliations along the way, none meant to offend, all simply the cost of being overlooked. It had been over 4 years since Layla's last real interview. She still remembered the way the recruiter at the international consultancy firm had smiled stiffly after seeing her some Ivy League grad, fluent in 5 languages, Middle Eastern cultural analysis. GPA 3.9, then looked up at her with that familiar flicker in the eyes. Not hostility, just discomfort, uncertainty. Her name, her face, the accent she no longer had. Something about her didn't fit the company profile. 2 months later, she applied to work for Atlantic Skies. They called her in that same day. She didn't hate the job. It was honest. And she liked the silence of night flights, the rhythm of the clouds, the strange intimacy of strangers dozing in half-lit cabins above the world. But some nights like this one, her mind drifted. To the seminar she never gave. The field research she abandoned. The Fulbright offer she turned down when her father was wrongly arrested, and she became the sole provider for her family. She felt the familiar flicker of regret in her chest. Not bitterness, just a low, dull ache. The kind that settles into your ribs when you stop hoping people will see you for more than the uniform you wear. "Ma'am, can I get a clean blanket for 3F?" a young attendant asked. Breaking her thoughts, Layla nodded politely, pulled one from the storage bin, and handed it over without a word. The attendant didn't say thank you. She didn't notice the elegant Arabic calligraphy tattooed in faint ink along Layla's wrist. 2 hours into the flight, Layla found herself stationed near the front of business class, restocking the galley drawers. She reached for the silver tea box when she heard a voice. A man, perhaps early 50s, gray suit, tailored but understated, had just stepped into the aisle from 1A. He looked distracted, fumbling with his phone and Bluetooth earpiece. "Where's my damn assistant?" he muttered, half to himself. Layla glanced up but didn't engage. She recognized the man. Julian Hayes, billionaire founder of Hayes Holdings, tech investor, philanthropist, part-time diplomat. She'd seen his face in magazines and airport lounges. He flew Atlantic skies once a week, always solo, always stone-faced. He never spoke to staff, not out of arrogance, but indifference. His phone buzzed. Then again. He cursed under his breath and turned toward the curtained doorway. "Damn signal," he grumbled. "Where's a quiet corner on this damn plane?" Then it happened. A different phone, not his, buzzed in the open seat pocket next to 1A. A sleek silver international phone, forgotten. It buzzed again. And again. Layla instinctively walked over. She looked at the phone, then at Mr. Hayes, who was now halfway down the aisle with no clue he'd left something behind. The screen glowed incoming call private number underneath Arabic script. Gulf region code. It buzzed. Again. Layla hesitated. Then she picked it up. "Hello?" she said softly. In Arabic. There was a pause. Then a man's voice responded, formal, deep, accented. "Yes, this is Mr. Nasser Al-Fahim, calling from Doha. I was expecting to speak with Julian Hayes regarding the Eastern Corridor Consortium." Layla's breath caught. She knew the name. Al-Fahim Group, the biggest infrastructure conglomerate in the Middle East. The one Hayes Holdings had been rumored to be courting for months. She answered before thinking. In crisp, fluent Arabic, "Mr. Julian is temporarily unavailable. May I assist or relay a message?" There was a pause on the other end. "You speak Arabic?" he asked. "Yes," she replied calmly. "Would you like me to take a message or schedule a return call?" Then, from behind her, the unmistakable sound of leather shoes on carpet. Layla turned. Julian Hayes was standing there, staring at her, frozen. She was still holding his phone to her ear. Their eyes met, and that was the moment everything changed. Layla's breath hitched as she met Julian Hayes' eyes. His stare wasn't angry, nor was it confused. It was something sharper, intrigue wrapped in disbelief. She straightened instinctively, but she didn't hang up. "Yes, Mr. Al-Fahim," she said into the phone, her voice steady despite the tremor rising inside her. "Mr. Hayes has just returned. May I transfer the call now?" There was a pause on the other end, and then, "Yes, but I must say your accent, your command of formal Arabic, you are clearly not just an assistant." "I'm just part of the crew, sir," Layla said softly, transferring now. She gently handed the phone to Julian, still silent. Julian took the device, eyes never leaving hers. "This is Hayes," he said briskly, walking a few feet away, back into the quiet alcove near first class. Layla turned away, her pulse hammering. What had she just done? Was that overstepping? Would he file a complaint? Would she be pulled aside by security once they landed? She busied herself with wiping a clean surface that didn't need wiping. Anything to keep her hands from shaking. Across the aisle, a passenger raised an eyebrow at her, clearly having overheard some of the exchange. Another whispered something to his seatmate in what sounded like a dismissive tone. Layla didn't hear the words, just the heat of judgment. It curled around her spine like smoke. A few minutes passed. Julian returned, phone in hand. He was composed, but his eyes held a glint Layla hadn't seen before. Curiosity. "Walk with me," he said, not unkindly, not authoritatively, simply interested. Layla hesitated. "Please," he added. She nodded and followed him to the forward galley, where the noise of the engines offered just enough privacy. He turned to her, leaning slightly on the counter. That wasn't conversational Arabic, he said. That was polished, diplomatic. Your grammar, your cadence it was. Impeccable. I studied it. She replied carefully. Where Georgetown? International Studies? Arabic? Farsi? And cultural diplomacy. She kept her voice low, eyes flicking between his face and the overhead compartments. Julian's brows rose. Georgetown, I graduated 8 years ago. And you're cleaning planes. Her jaw tightened a little. She hated this part. The disbelief. The quiet calculation behind their eyes, wondering what she had done wrong, where she had failed, what she must have lacked. Life doesn't always run in straight lines, she said simply. Sometimes you circle before you land. Julian studied her for a moment longer, then leaned back slightly, as if recalibrating. Do you know who you just spoke to? I do. And what that call was about, I heard the phrase Eastern Corridor Consortium. That's the infrastructure deal spanning Doha, Nairobi, and Jakarta, worth somewhere between $50 and $100 million in early-stage partnerships. You've been trying to get a meeting with him for months. Now Julian looked startled. How do I read? She said. I listen. Sometimes, when I'm not being looked at, I see more. He smiled just a flicker, and for a moment, the high-altitude chill between them thawed. You saved that call, he said. If I'd missed it again, he would have moved on. I didn't mean to interfere. You didn't interfere, he said slowly. You translated, you engaged, and frankly, you handled him better than half my strategy team. Layla didn't know how to respond to that, so she just gave a small nod. Then came the question she'd been dreading. What's your name? Layla Morgan. Is that your married name? No, she said quickly. I was born Layla Al-Masri. I changed it after college, for the job hunt. His face flickered with understanding. Easier that way. Sometimes, she said, not always. He nodded, then looked down at the phone in his hand. Quiet for a moment. I've spent months hiring consultants, PR strategists, cross-cultural liaisons, and none of them spoke with the ease or nuance you just did. Maybe that's because they're always trying to prove they belong in the room, Layla said, almost without thinking. People like me stopped getting invited, so we speak like we already know the cost of not being heard. Julian looked at her like he was seeing something more than her words, like he was cataloging the weight behind them. There was a long silence between them, one that didn't feel awkward. Then a chime over the intercom announced meal service was beginning soon. Layla took a breath. I should get back. Julian didn't stop her, but as she turned, he said, I'd like to speak with you again before we land, if you're willing. She looked back. Why? Because I think I've underestimated a lot of things lately, and I don't want to keep doing that. Layla nodded slowly. He'll think about it. She walked away, heart pounding, unsure if she'd just stepped into an opportunity or a firestorm. Layla returned to the business class galley like nothing had happened, though everything inside her had changed. Her body moved out of habit, refilling the tea cart, folding napkins, checking tray alignment, but her mind was spiraling. She replayed the call in her head, the look on Julian Hayes' face, the tone of his voice when he said, You saved that call. That wasn't a compliment she'd expected in her lifetime. Back in seat 1A, Julian Hayes sat still, staring out at the dark horizon. The cabin lights were dimmed, most passengers lost in movies or reclined in sleep masks. But Julian wasn't the sort who could shut his brain off. He never had been. Tonight, though, his thoughts weren't on business projections or mergers. They were on her, Layla. He hadn't meant to listen in on her call, but the moment he heard that voice measured, respectful, fluent, something in him stopped. She hadn't stumbled or paused. She'd sounded not only fluent, but culturally attuned, like someone who'd lived the language, who'd earned it. It wasn't just the Arabic. It was the way she handled Al-Fahim, the composure, the humility, the clarity. That sort of instinct couldn't be taught in a crash course or gleaned from a LinkedIn course on cultural competence. That was lived experience, and he couldn't believe it was coming from a woman in a cleaning uniform. He sipped his black coffee and glanced at the empty seat beside him. For someone like him, used to polished boardrooms and echo chambers of approval, Layla was a shock to the system. Not because she was better than the people he usually hired, but because she was invisible to them all. He remembered something his father once said before a negotiation with a Saudi investor. Always listen to the quietest person in the room. They're the ones who've spent their lives learning how to observe before they speak. Julian had ignored that wisdom more times than he could count. But right now, that truth landed hard. Meanwhile, at the back of the galley, Layla kept her head down. She couldn't afford to be noticed, at least not more than she already had been. She felt exposed, like someone had pulled back the curtain she'd worked so hard to sew. For a moment, she imagined what would have happened if she had stayed silent, if she hadn't answered the call. Would Al-Fahim have hung up? Would Julian have missed out on the one chance to salvage the deal? Would he even have known she could speak Arabic? Then again, what would it matter she wasn't part of that world? Not really. "Hey," a voice whispered. Layla turned. It was Sierra, one of the junior flight attendants, blonde, cheerful, and no older than 22. "I saw what you did earlier." "With the phone," Sierra said. "That was kind of amazing." Layla gave a tight smile. "Thanks. I didn't know you spoke Arabic." Layla hesitated. "There's a lot people don't know." Sierra lowered her voice. "Do you think you're in trouble?" "I don't think so," Layla said honestly. "But I also don't know." Sierra looked impressed. "Well, if it means anything, I think it was badass." Layla chuckled under her breath. "That's one word for it." She stepped out of the galley and made her way down the aisle, checking overhead bins and helping an elderly woman adjust her seatbelt. The rhythm of the cabin settled into silence again, but her thoughts refused to. What did Julian want from her? Why did it matter that he saw her now? Was it too late for someone like her to be more than invisible? She reached for the service cart and noticed her hands were trembling. Julian didn't sleep the rest of the flight. Instead, he reviewed the documents his assistant had emailed to the in-flight server, early schematics for the Al-Fahim Corridor project, slides from previous failed presentations, cultural notes prepared by overpriced consultants who'd never set foot outside Manhattan. They all felt sterile compared to what he'd witnessed earlier. For the first time in months, he felt a sliver of clarity. When the intercom announced 4 hours to arrival, Julian stood and walked back toward the galley. Layla was organizing stacked water bottles in a storage drawer when she heard his voice. "Got a minute?" She turned slowly. He wasn't smiling, but there was no coldness in him now. "Just focus." "I do." He gestured toward a jump seat nearby. She sat. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed loosely. "I'm not good at small talk," he began, "so I'll just ask." Layla waited. "How long have you been working this job?" "Almost 2 years. And before that, I tutored kids in Arabic and Spanish. Worked in a community language center in Queens. And before that, I tried to get hired in every policy consulting firm in D.C. and New York that said they wanted diversity on their website." Julian's lips twitched at the honesty. "Did they ever call back once?" for an interview where they asked me to explain what Ramadan was. As a test, his face darkened. Layla looked him dead in the eyes. I'm not bitter. I just got tired. Julian exhaled. Layla, I'm going to say something blunt, and I want you to know I mean it with respect. Okay, you're better than half the people I work with, and not just because you speak 6 languages. 7, she corrected gently. He smiled. Even better. Layla's gaze softened. Julian straightened. I'd like to offer you something when we land, something different, bigger, real. What does that mean? I don't know yet, he said honestly. But I don't want to waste your time or your mind just because you're wearing the wrong uniform. Layla didn't speak for a long moment, and then, very quietly, she said, I'll listen, but I won't beg. Julian nodded. Solemn. You won't have to. Layla had cleaned every square inch of first class more times than she could count. She knew where the tray tables stuck, which privacy partitions jammed, and which leather seat had a scratch so faint no passenger had ever noticed. But she had never sat in one of those seats. Until now. Julian didn't make a spectacle. He didn't bark orders or wave authority like a wand. He simply returned to seat 1A, picked up his tablet, and a few moments later, a flight attendant senior, sharp, eyes always watching, walked back to Layla with a confused expression. Mr. Hayes has requested your presence in first. He says you're assisting him with an urgent cross-cultural protocol issue. Layla blinked. Protocol. He used that word exactly. Layla exhaled slowly. Understood. The attendant shifted uncomfortably. Should I inform the cabin lead? No, Layla said, standing tall. I'll handle it. She smoothed her navy uniform, brushed the lint from her sleeves, and made her way forward, not with meekness, but with quiet gravity. She didn't look down, didn't rush. Passengers noticed her now, not as the invisible one who cleared away wrappers, but as someone moving with purpose, with invitation. As she passed through the thick curtain into first, the change in lighting hit first warmer, golden, then the space wider aisles, wider armrests, wider assumptions. Julian stood and gestured to the seat across from him. Please. She hesitated. Layla, I'm not asking for a favor. I'm asking for a conversation. That seat doesn't change who you are. No, she said gently, but sometimes it changes how people see me. He nodded, not flippantly, but with understanding. She sat. For a while, they didn't talk. Layla sipped still water, watching the stars flicker through the window. Julian typed something on his tablet, then paused, setting it aside. When I was younger, he said, my father brought me to a business dinner in Cairo. I was 16. He was negotiating with a telecom giant, and he told me not to say a word unless spoken to. Smart man, Layla murmured. Julian smiled. Maybe, but I didn't listen. I asked a question, something basic, about regional broadband limitations. The Egyptian CEO went silent, then burst out laughing, not in a mocking way. He said no American executive had ever bothered to ask such a thing. Julian looked at her. That deal went through. My father credited me, though I barely did anything. But what I've never forgotten is what the man told me afterward. He said, a child who listens to the world will one day lead it. A man who thinks he knows it all will die behind his desk. Layla let the silence settle. I haven't been listening much lately, he said. To the world, she asked. To people who don't look like me. Layla studied him. People don't fail to listen because they're evil. They fail because the system teaches them whose voices matter. He nodded slowly. And I think you matter. Layla. She blinked, not expecting the rawness of that statement. Let me be clear, he continued. I'm not offering you a handout or redemption. I don't believe in performative hiring, and I'm not trying to diversify my portfolio for optics. Then what are you offering? Her voice was steady now, strong, a partnership, not in name, not in titles, but in impact. I want to build something that bridges regions, that respects culture before profit. And I need someone who doesn't need to perform because she already understands. You barely know me. I watched you do in 5 minutes what my team hasn't done in 5 months. That doesn't mean I'm ready for the world you live in. Julian leaned forward. I think the world I live in needs more of the world you've survived. Layla felt that, deep in her chest. Her throat tightened. Still, she asked, why now, why me? He hesitated, then said something he hadn't said out loud in years. Because I'm tired of sitting in rooms filled with people who speak for places they've never been to and talk about people they've never spoken with. Layla swallowed. I can't promise I won't say no, she said finally. I've spent years making peace with small spaces, with being unseen. I don't know if I can suddenly show up in full view. I'm not asking you to be someone else, Julian replied. I'm asking you to stop hiding. Layla looked out the window. The sky was velvet now, the wings sliced through clouds like silk. After a long pause, she said quietly, I've never been invited into a room I didn't clean afterward. Julian smiled gently. Then maybe it's time to rewrite that story. The plane bumped gently through light turbulence, and neither of them flinched. They'd already weathered something much more uncertain. Layla turned to him. Tell me about the Al Fahim proposal. From the beginning, no PR polish, just facts. Julian raised an eyebrow. You want to hear the raw version? I want to know what you've been trying to sell and why it keeps failing. He picked up the tablet and turned it toward her. As she read, her fingers traced the edges of the screen. Her mind whirred. She was no longer just seeing the project. She was reimagining it as only someone who truly understood both sides could. And for the first time in years, Layla wasn't cleaning a mess left by others. She was preparing to build something no one else had dared. When Layla returned to the galley an hour later, the seat felt different beneath her. Her body was still wrapped in the same Navy uniform, her ID badge still clipped at her chest, but something fundamental had shifted. The cabin crew barely looked up when she slipped past them. To them, she was still the cleaning girl, still the ghost of the flight. But inside, something was rattling loose. Her hands shook as she opened the supply drawer, pretending to check the stock of coffee pods. Not because of fear, but because the conversation with Julian had cracked something open. And now, the voices she had spent years silencing in herself were spilling out. She leaned against the narrow counter and exhaled, grounding herself in the whir of the aircraft. This wasn't supposed to happen. She had designed her life carefully, like a system meant to withstand disappointment. You don't hope, so you can't be let down. You don't expect, so you can't be embarrassed. You don't dream, because dreams are made of glass and glass breaks too easily when no one's looking out for you. But now a billionaire had not only seen her, but asked for her. Her. Layla Al-Masri, daughter of a Palestinian father who was detained for a crime he didn't commit, raised by a mother who worked 12-hour shifts in a Queens bakery to keep them afloat. A girl who had spoken 3 languages by age 10, who graduated magna cum laude, who once gave a TEDx talk to an audience of 12. A girl who had watched every single job offer vanish after the interviews moved from Zoom to in-person. No one ever said it to her face. No one had to. Sometimes it was the pause when they read her last name, the way Layla would come out of their mouths with careful hesitation, or the looks when she walked in darker skin, eyes lined like a borderland, not ambiguous enough to pass for European, not familiar enough to be trusted. She used to leave those interviews repeating the same line in her head. Maybe next time, maybe if I say less, smile more. Straighten my hair. Don't mention Morocco. Eventually, she stopped going. Then came the Atlantic Skies job. It didn't ask questions. It asked for fingerprints and background checks and availability. It asked for silence. And Layla had learned to give it. She pulled out a sanitizing wipe and scrubbed at the counter even though it gleamed. There was something soothing about the motion back and forth. Repetitive, cleansing, until she heard footsteps. Layla Sierra again. Her face flushed from rushing. The lead wants you to take your break. Says we've got the cabin handled. Layla blinked. Break, yeah. Like actual rest. You've been going nonstop. I'm okay. Sierra lowered her voice. Listen, that guy in First Julian Hayes' word is he asked the captain for Wi-Fi bandwidth priority to finish a call with a Qatari business leader. And he told the purser you helped him land the deal. Layla froze. He said that apparently it was a big call. Global something. I didn't catch the details. But the purser said he hasn't seen Mr. Hayes this animated since 2019. Sierra paused. Is he like offering you a job or something? Layla laughed once. Dry. I don't know. I think he's offering me a question. Like do I want to stop pretending? Invisible Sierra's eyes widened, but she didn't speak. Layla turned away. Fine. Really. You can use the lower crew rest, Sierra said gently. I already told the others. No one's going to interrupt you. Layla nodded and made her way down the narrow staircase, past the galley doors, into the hidden capsule below economy where the crew slept in shifts. She climbed into the bottom bunk, shut the privacy curtain, and lay flat. For the first time in hours, she was alone. No Julian, no passengers, no expectations, just her, and the storm inside her. She closed her eyes, but instead of silence, memories surfaced like waves. Her father, handcuffed in their queen's apartment, asking in Arabic, Layla Habibti, don't be afraid. Her mother crying in the car after Layla's final interview rejection, whispering, they don't know what they're losing, baby. But one day, someone will. And Layla herself, standing outside the university auditorium with a diploma in one hand and no job prospects in the other, telling herself maybe survival is enough. Maybe being unseen is safer. But now, for the first time, that belief felt like a lie, because someone had seen her, and that meant she had to start seeing herself differently, too. She sat up, swung her legs over the side of the bunk, and opened the privacy curtain. The soft cabin light glowed above. A flight attendant passed by without noticing. Layla pulled the pen from her pocket, and slowly, on a leftover paper napkin, she wrote, I resign from the role of being small. Then, underneath it, she added, not because I'm ungrateful, but because I finally remember who I was before the world asked me to shrink. She folded the napkin and tucked it inside her ID badge pouch. Back on her feet, she climbed the stairs and headed not toward the cleaning cart, but toward first class. Julian looked up as she arrived. She didn't ask permission. She simply sat down across from him, eyes clear, voice calm. Let's talk about this job you're imagining, she said, and let's make sure it's not just charity with a new label. Julian smiled, not the polite smile of a businessman, but the honest one of someone who'd been waiting for this moment. You have my word, he said. No charity, no labels. Good, she said, folding her arms. Then, let's talk impact. And in that instant, somewhere high above the Atlantic, between time zones and turbulent skies, a woman once erased by the system started to write a new story with her own hand. The cabin lights dimmed again, signaling the transition from meal service to quiet hours. Most passengers had reclined their seats, drawn their window shades, and fallen into that strange half-sleep you only find above 30,000 feet. but not in first class, not in seat 1A, and certainly not for Layla. She sat with Julian, her posture upright, her mind alert. His tablet was between them, glowing faintly with architectural mock-ups and financial projections for the Eastern Corridor project. Pages of diagrams, bullet points, and strategy decks scrolled by, but Layla was focused not on the data but on the gaps between the lines. She tapped the screen. "This translation is off," she said. "This section here about environmental impact, the phrasing is too clinical. It reads like a dismissive afterthought." Julian leaned in. "That's how the consultancy framed it." "Exactly," Layla said. "That might fly in Manhattan, but to a regional investor from Doha or Jakarta, it sounds like you don't take their values seriously." Julian nodded, intrigued. "How would you phrase it?" Layla paused, thinking. "You say something like, our commitment to honoring regional ecosystems isn't just an add-on, it's a reflection of our shared responsibility. You acknowledge that environmental concern isn't a Western idea. It's a human one. Cultural nuance is about emotional truth, not fancy terms." Julian blinked. "You should be the one presenting this. I don't have a title." He gave her a look. "Well, fix that." Just as she was about to respond, a voice crackled from the intercom. "Mr. Hayes, this is Captain Groves. Sorry to disturb. We've just received a request for a live video connection from Al-Fahim's delegation. They want to discuss final clarifications on your pitch tonight." Julian cursed under his breath. Tonight, Layla raised an eyebrow. "They're testing you. What they want to see how flexible you are, if you really operate globally, or just say you do. This is about time zones, power, and who has to adjust. You can't say no." Julian nodded. Understood. He turned toward the galley phone. "Can they patch the video through to my seat? They can set up the secure connection at the forward galley screen." The flight attendant answered. A moment later, the screen was mounted at the front bulkhead, privacy screens drawn. Layla stood beside Julian as the pixelated image of Nasser Al-Fahim came into view. Wearing a white kandura, dark eyes sharp, seated between two younger advisors. "Mr. Hayes," Nasser greeted. "Thank you for taking this call mid-flight. We won't take too much of your time." "Not at all," Julian said, voice smooth. "Appreciate your flexibility as well." But Al-Fahim didn't respond. His gaze shifted. "To be honest, I wanted to speak again after yesterday's brief interaction with your assistant." Layla straightened instinctively, though her hands remained folded. "I found her fluency linguistic and cultural to be more than professional." It was intuitive. Julian glanced at Layla. "Yes, that's Layla Morgan. She's the reason we didn't miss your call." Nasser smiled slightly. "Then perhaps we should speak to her directly." Julian hesitated. Layla stepped forward. "Mr. Al-Fahim," she said in formal Arabic, her tone respectful but self-possessed. "It's an honor to speak again. I'd be happy to assist in whatever way I can." The young advisor next to Nasser scoffed lightly. "Are you formally on the Hayes Holdings strategy team?" Layla smiled without blinking. "Titles are useful, but experience and integrity speak louder than nameplates." The older man, Nasser, nodded, spoken like someone who's been ignored too long, or simply listened longer than most. She replied. He chuckled. "Then let's see how deep your listening goes." He shifted to a more formal tone, laying out concerns about how the proposed infrastructure model might disregard traditional land use in the more rural portions of eastern Oman. He listed 3 key policy concerns, including a misinterpreted clause about private sector control over transport hubs. Layla didn't flinch. She translated the issues back to Julian in English, but added context explaining historical sensitivities, religious significance of certain locations, and the political undertones embedded in each phrase. Julian took notes furiously. He could barely keep up. "Can you respond to him directly?" Julian asked her quietly. Layla looked into the screen and, in crisp Arabic, said, "Mr. Al-Fahim, Hayes Holdings understands that development must come with dignity. Your points about rural impact and decentralization are not only valid, they reflect concerns we should have highlighted earlier. Our revised proposal will prioritize partnership, not acquisition. We don't seek to replicate a Western model, but to create a hybrid that respects local rhythm." There was a pause, a long one. Then Nasser leaned forward, clasping his hands. "Miss Morgan, or do you prefer Layla? Layla is fine." "Sir, Layla, would you consider joining our next in-person strategy meeting next week in Abu Dhabi? Would benefit from your voice?" Julian looked stunned. Layla didn't. She simply said, "I would be honored, Mr. Al-Fahim, if Mr. Hayes agrees." Julian smiled, wholeheartedly. "Then, well, arrange transport and clearance." Nasser said, "Thank you. Well, talk soon." The screen went dark. Julian let out a long breath, rubbing his hands over his face. "You just closed that deal?" "No," Layla said, her voice lower now. "I reopened it." Julian turned to her. "Layla, what do you want?" She looked at him, unsure how to answer. What did she want? Recognition, redemption, a career, a future that didn't make her fold herself into smaller versions just to survive. What she wanted was to no longer be seen as a miracle, but as someone who belonged in the room. "I want to earn my place," she said, "without having to erase myself to get there." Julian nodded slowly. "Then, let's make that happen." Layla looked around the cabin, now dim and still, but inside her, everything had woken up. The glow of the cabin screen faded, but its effects lingered like heat in Layla's chest. She had just negotiated live with one of the most influential business figures in the Middle East. Mid-air, wearing a cleaning uniform. A few hours ago, she was wiping fingerprints off a tray table. Now she was being invited to Abu Dhabi to consult on a billion-dollar project. It should have felt euphoric, but something heavy was beginning to settle on her. As the aircraft coasted through a quiet stretch of sky, Layla slipped away from first class and returned to the crew galley. She needed air, not the recycled cabin kind, but space to think. Her mind raced, not with excitement, but with doubt. The questions came like whispers in the dark. "What are you doing? Who do you think you are? You don't belong in those rooms. They'll laugh the moment you leave." "Look at you!" a voice said sharply, snapping her out of her spiral. Layla turned to see Marla, the senior flight supervisor for the crew, arms crossed, expression tight. "You've been in first for over an hour. That's not your zone." "Layla, I was invited by a passenger." "For business purposes?" Marla raised an eyebrow. "Business, you're part of the sanitation crew. That passenger was Julian Hayes, and he asked for my cultural insight. Is that what we're calling it now?" Layla stiffened. The insinuation wasn't new. Women like her were always one comment away from being reduced either to seduction or servitude. It didn't matter how she'd carried herself. To some, she'd always be a question mark wrapped in suspicion. "I'm not here for games." "Marla," Layla said calmly, "you know I do my job. Then maybe you should stick to it." There was silence, cold, sharp. Then Marla added, more quietly, "You're not the first overqualified woman on this plane. Layla, you just talk like the rest of us didn't have dreams, too." That struck deeper than Layla expected. Marla didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away. Layla sank onto the metal fold-down jump seat, her hands trembling slightly. The sting of Marla's words wrapped around her like a familiar coat. She had heard versions of this before from strangers, former co-workers, even family members. You think you're better than us? Why are you reaching for more? Be grateful. You want too much, and that makes people uncomfortable. What if they were right? What if stepping into that video call had made her visible in the wrong way? She pulled out her ID badge and stared at it. It didn't show her degrees, or the languages she spoke, or the pain she'd endured. It just said, clean and cabin services. For a long time, that label had felt like safety. Now it felt like a cage. Later, during crew rest rotations, Layla lay again in the bunk area, but she didn't sleep. She stared at the padded ceiling just inches above her face, heart pounding. Did she want this future Julian hinted at? What if she got on that stage in Abu Dhabi and failed? What if Nasser had only been impressed because he expected nothing? And worst of all, what if she succeeded and lost herself in the process? Would people like Marla be the first to resent her? Would people like Julian stop respecting her the moment she made a mistake? At that moment, a knock came on the curtain. Layla Sierra whispered, "Are you awake?" Layla slid the curtain open. Sierra crawled into the bunk area and sat cross-legged beside her, the glow of her phone casting soft shadows. I just wanted to say, Sierra hesitated. Marla's wrong. Layla blinked. You heard, she made a snide comment near the galley, said you were probably trying to network your way into a desk job. I said nothing, and I regret that. Layla sat up slowly. Sierra continued, her voice trembling a little. I didn't go to college. I didn't grow up speaking 5 languages. But I know a woman with fire when I see one. You walked into first class like you belong there. Because you do. Layla swallowed hard. Don't let anyone shame you for being extraordinary in a place that expects you to be invisible, Sierra said. Not even the ones who pretend to root for you. Layla exhaled, emotion swelling behind her ribs. Thank you. Sierra smiled. You didn't ask for this spotlight, but now that it's on you, stand in it. Some of us need to see what that looks like. Then she left quietly, leaving Layla alone with her heartbeat and a different kind of whisper. This one wasn't doubt. It was resolve. By the time the plane began its slow descent over the glowing edges of Abu Dhabi's coastline, Layla stood in the forward galley again, this time not hiding, not apologizing. She had brushed her curls back into a neat bun, cleaned the faint makeup smudges under her eyes, and stood tall in the same uniform that had once hidden her. It was still the same navy blue, but she had changed. Julian appeared beside her, nodding in quiet approval. You ready? Layla didn't smile. She didn't joke. She just said I was born ready. I just forgot for a while. And when the wheels touched down, Layla Morgan didn't just arrive in the United Arab Emirates. She arrived for herself. The heat hit Layla the moment the jet door opened a wave of dry desert air scented with sun-scorched tarmac and jet fuel. But beneath it, something else pulsed the hum of opportunity, of a moment she hadn't dared dream about now unfolding at her feet. She stepped off the aircraft in silence, her heart thudding against her ribs like it was trying to escape. Julian walked beside her in tailored navy slacks and a crisp white shirt, already switching into executive mode as his assistant greeted them at the bottom of the air stair with iced bottled water and an air-conditioned car waiting at the curb. But Layla hesitated before stepping into the car, because just beyond the tinted windows of that luxury vehicle stood a world she thought she'd never see again. Not like this. Arabic signs. Women in abayas walking confidently in the terminal. A billboard for a regional bank written in both English and script that Shed once traced in her father's prayer book. The sight of her ancestral language printed on concrete and glass sent an unexpected ache through her chest. She had spent years hiding that language inside herself like a secret. Now it welcomed her like a lost daughter. The ride to the downtown business tower was smooth and silent. Julian tapped away on his tablet, prepping notes. Layla stared out the window, watching the low sun dip behind palm-lined roads. Every once in a while, a word would flicker past on a Sinkaida leadership, Tathf, cultural engagement, Mufasa preservation, words she hadn't said aloud in years, because in the life she'd built in America, Arabic was a liability, not professionally, personally. People asked where she was really from. They asked if her father had ever been on a list. They called her Layla Morgan, but asked why she didn't have a southern accent. So she stopped correcting them, stopped saying Al-Masri, stopped telling them she once spent her summers memorizing Quran verses with her grandmother while helping her make stuffed grape leaves. Layla Morgan was easier, palatable, employable. But here in Abu Dhabi, as the skyline rose around her like a promise she dared not make, she realized something terrifying and beautiful at once. To be seen fully, she'd have to reclaim what she had buried. Her name, her voice, her origin. The conference room on the 30th floor was floor-to-ceiling glass, the Persian Gulf winking in the distance. Inside, Nasser Al-Fahim waited, impeccably dressed in a tailored thobe, gold cufflinks catching the sunlight. He stood when Layla entered. "Miss Morgan," he greeted. Layla nodded politely. "It's an honor to be here." Julian followed behind, exchanging formal pleasantries. But as the meeting began with investors from Oman, Qatar, and Indonesia dialing in, some physically present Layla couldn't help but noticed the shift in energy whenever she spoke. At first, the other men raised their eyebrows, some with amusement, some with skepticism. But then she translated Julian's pitch in flawless Arabic, paused to clarify a local ordinance reference in Bahasa Indonesia, and even corrected a misused proverb one consultant quoted from a Tunisian trade paper. By the end of the first hour, no one was asking who she was. They were asking what else she knew. During the lunch break, Nasser invited her to walk the courtyard gardens outside the tower. Julian stayed inside. As they walked under the shade of palm trees beside a small fountain, Nasser said, "Your Arabic is not just fluent. It's familiar." Palestinian. Layla's throat tightened. "Yes," she said, "my father was born near Nablus. My mother's from Tangier. And your name?" Morgan Layla hesitated, then exhaled. "My full name is Layla Al-Masri." Nasser smiled gently. "I thought so. I changed it," she said. "In America, a name like that doesn't always open doors." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes we trade heritage for access, but the cost is never just administrative." She felt a sudden pressure behind her eyes. "I didn't want to be someone else. I just wanted to be seen." And now Layla looked out over the glittering gulf. "Now I want to be recognized, but without losing myself in the process." Nasser placed a hand over his heart. "You have already done that. And if you ever need to reclaim your name, know that in this part of the world, it still carries weight." Layla swallowed hard. In that moment, under the desert sun, it wasn't just about career anymore. It was about returning to herself. That evening, after the meeting concluded with handshakes and signed letters of intent, Julian and Layla stood in the hallway outside the boardroom, bathed in the amber glow of the setting sun. Julian looked at her and said, "You did more than deliver. You owned the room." She didn't smile. "I didn't do it for you." "I know," he said, "but I'm grateful anyway." They stood in silence for a moment, the hum of the city below them, the residue of power thick in the air. "May I ask you something?" he said. "Go ahead. Why didn't you tell me who you really were?" Layla looked him dead in the eyes. "Because most people don't ask. They assume. And eventually, you stop offering pieces of yourself that always get rejected." Julian nodded. "Then, sorry I didn't ask sooner." Layla's voice was soft. It's not just about asking, it's about being willing to listen to the answer. He smiled, then extended his hand. She didn't shake it. She just said, I go by Layla Al-Masri now. If this partnership continues, that's the name I expect to see on the letterhead. Julian's face broke into a slow, respectful grin. Understood. Miss Al-Masri. And with that, Layla turned and walked away from the boardroom, not in retreat, but in ownership of her name, her power, her place. The return flight to the U.S. felt shorter. Not in time, 14 hours from Abu Dhabi to New York still demanded every ounce of patience, but in distance, because something inside Layla had shifted. She wasn't returning home. She was carrying home with her now. Her name, her heritage, her voice. She had worn all of them on her sleeve in front of some of the most powerful people in the world, and not only had they listened, they had followed. She boarded the plane with a new ticket, business class, seat 3A, no longer a cleaner, no longer invisible. She wore the same navy blazer from Julian's team. Her credentials were temporary for now, but the respect in the eyes of the boarding agents, the way the staff greeted her by name, welcome aboard. Ms. Al-Masri was anything but performative. This time, the uniform was gone. So was the badge that had once reduced her to one word, cabin. Layla Al-Masri was no longer part of the background. Still, her nerves stirred as the aircraft climbed above the clouds. She opened her laptop and stared at the email waiting in her drafts folder, her official resignation from Atlantic Skies Ground Services. It was short, formal, emotionless, but every word had cost her something. She didn't owe them anything, she reminded herself, not after years of being overlooked, but there was still that part of her trained to feel guilt for choosing herself that hesitated. Layla, you're lucky to have a job. Do you really think you'll be more than this? Play it safe. People like you don't get second chances. Those voices lingered, but now a louder one had emerged. Your name means something. You belong in the room. She hit send. The whoosh of the email leaving her outbox felt like air rushing through a newly opened window. Julian, seated a few rows ahead, turned in his seat and caught her eye. He mouthed, "You okay?" Layla nodded, not with forced poise, but with real steadiness. Later, over a quiet in-flight meal of lentil soup and spiced chicken, Julian slid a folder toward her. "Contract offer," he said. She didn't touch it. Instead, she asked, "Why now?" "Why me? I've hired experts," Julian said plainly. "Consultants, MBAs, international fixers. They all speak fluently, but none of them understand. You knew how to speak to Al-Fahim not because of training, but because you belong to that world. And you belong to mine, too. You bridge things most people don't even know are disconnected." He paused. "You didn't just help me close a deal. You taught me how much I'd missed by not looking beyond what was on our some." Layla picked up the contract and skimmed the first page. Senior Advisor for Cross-Cultural Strategy. Full-time. Flexible location. Executive track. She read it twice. "You're serious." Julian smiled. "Deadly." She exhaled. "And if I say no, then he'll be disappointed, but still changed. You made me better at what I do. That doesn't disappear." Layla sat quietly. She wasn't afraid of the work. She was afraid of what accepting would mean, that she was worthy, that the fight to survive hadn't been the story, it was just the prologue. Back in New York, the city greeted her with a wet slap of winter wind. Snowflakes danced sideways through the taxi headlights as she arrived at her apartment. It hadn't changed. Peeling paint, second-floor walk-up, muffled arguments through the paper-thin walls. But something inside her had She stood in the center of the small living room and whispered aloud, "I am no longer living like I'm afraid to be seen." She pulled out a leather notebook and opened a fresh page. "Things I will no longer apologize for the weight of my name. My mother's accent, speaking 6 languages, turning down safe roles, outgrowing small expectations, wanting more." She closed the notebook and set it on the shelf beside her father's old Quran, now wrapped in a silk cloth from Abu Dhabi. The next day, she met Sierra at a small cafe in Brooklyn. Her old friend nearly spilled her coffee when she saw Layla walk in, not because of her clothes or posture, but because of her presence. "You look like someone who stopped waiting for permission," Sierra said, eyes wide. Layla laughed. "That's because I did." Sierra leaned in. "Tell me everything." Layla told her about the flight, the video call, the meeting, the contract, the choice. Sierra stared. "So, what now?" Layla sipped her tea. "Now I choose the hard thing, the right thing. I say yes. To the job, to all of it." That night, Layla officially signed the offer letter. Her signature. Layla Al-Masri felt like a key unlocking a door she hadn't dared knock on. And when she clicked submit, she didn't flinch. The world wasn't giving her a seat at the table. She had taken it. The Hayes Holdings Manhattan office was unlike anything Layla had ever entered, not just in its architecture, but in the atmosphere. A high-rise of sharp suits and sharper tongues. Every corridor hummed with ambition. Conversations weren't just about strategies. They were about power. And today, for the first time, she wasn't here to clean the windows. She was here to change the view. Layla stepped out of the elevator, crisp navy pantsuit hugging her frame, a light silk blouse under the blazer. Her hair was tied in a low bun. Her heels clicked with deliberate grace, and her name badgy temporary until they printed the new one read clearly, Layla Al-Masri Senior Advisor, Global Strategy. The receptionist smiled nervously. She stood, "Ms. Al-Masri." "Welcome. You're expected." Layla nodded. "Calm, thank you." She walked past the same frosted glass conference rooms she had once cleaned on weekend night shifts while finishing her linguistics thesis. She had dusted the legs of the very table she was now about to sit at. Now, she was at the head of it. Inside the executive boardroom, the room buzzed with tension. Julian stood at the far end, sleeves rolled up, deep in discussion with a team of consultants and senior directors. She caught snippets, South Asia rollout Q1 risk expansion logistics. Then she froze, because someone was already seated at the far side of the table. A man with a thick binder open, pen in hand, reciting stats. His voice clipped, polished, too familiar. Alex Greer, her old college peer. He hadn't changed much, same expensive haircut, same tailored smugness. Years ago, he had sat beside her in a global business seminar and, after class, told her, "You're pretty impressive for someone with such a hard-to-pronounce last name." She had laughed it off. Until he ghosted her during a group project and then took credit for her Middle East market presentation. He was now one of Julian's senior market analysts. When he saw her enter, his smile cracked for a second. His eyebrows lifted. Then the smug grin returned. "Well, if it isn't Layla Morgan," he said loud enough for the others to hear. She looked him dead in the eyes. "It's Layla Al-Masri." Again. Julian turned, surprised, then smiled like he was watching the opening act of a long-anticipated show. Alex chuckled awkwardly. "Didn't expect to see you here." "I get that a lot," she replied, and took her seat directly across from him. The meeting began with slides and market data. But when Julian gestured to Layla and said, "I'd like our new senior advisor to walk us through our intercultural alignment challenges," the room went still. Layla stood slowly. No note cards, no preamble. Just her. Calm. Clear. Complete. She spoke about partnerships in Qatar, about regulatory tensions in Indonesia, about investor psychology in North Africa. She navigated charts with grace, outlined risks with precision, and then turned the screen dark. "Here's what isn't on the slides," she said. "The deals that die in this room don't die because of data. They die because of arrogance. We assume our Western metrics translate universally. They don't. Culture isn't a soft variable, it's the core." A murmur passed through the room. Alex cleared his throat. "Do you have data to back that, or is that just anecdotal?" Julian's mouth twitched. Layla didn't miss a beat. "What I have is a signed agreement with Al Fahim International closed in the air. Mid-flight, during a call I translated. The same deal your team couldn't secure after 3/4 of meetings." Silence. Then Julian said, "She's not exaggerating. We had a breakthrough because of her insight. And if we want to scale globally, this is the future of how we operate." The head of regional operations, a seasoned woman named Diane, nodded. "She's right. Data only gets us in the room. Understanding gets us a seat at the table." Alex looked away. After the meeting, Layla stepped into the hallway, adrenaline fading, pulse still high. Julian caught up to her. "You didn't just win the room," he said. "You redefined it." Layla smiled faintly. "I wasn't trying to prove anything." "I know," he said, "and that's why it worked." They stood quietly, looking out at the skyline. "Do you think I was too hard on Alex?" she asked softly. Julian laughed. "That was you being polite." She smirked, then grew serious. "He used to take credit for my work. Back in college," Julian's smile faded. "You didn't owe him grace. You owed yourself honesty." Layla nodded. "Then am not sorry. Good." As Julian walked away to prep for another call, Layla stood alone for a moment longer. She placed her hand on the cool glass window. Below her stretched the city that had once told her, "Be smaller, be quieter, blend in." Now it had no choice but to look up and notice her. And this time, she wasn't stepping back. The invitation came in a heavy black envelope with silver script across the front, Hayes Holdings Annual Global Partners Gala. Formal attire required. Layla found it waiting on her desk Monday morning. She turned it over in her hands, hesitating. Inside was not just a schedule of events or a guest list. Inside was a subtle message: "You're one of us now." The gala was the most public event of the company's year, held at a historic midtown ballroom with chandeliers the size of cars and the city's elite draped in couture and ego. It was the night Hayes Holdings showcased its power to investors, media, and industry rivals. And this year, Layla Al-Masri was no longer behind the curtain. She would be center stage. That evening, she stood before her mirror, unsure what to wear. It wasn't vanity. It was strategy. What did it mean to walk into a ballroom as both a woman of color and a newly promoted executive? She didn't want to blend in, but she also didn't want to become a talking point. She pulled out a dress her mother had sent from Tangier years ago. A midnight blue silk gown embroidered along the neckline with hand-stitched silver filigree. Traditional, elegant, timeless. She slipped it on, smoothed the fabric with both palms, and looked at herself. Not hiding, not apologizing. The gala was already in full swing when she arrived. Camera flashes sparked at the entry. Her name was checked off by security. Her heels tapped quietly over marble floors as she stepped inside. The room was an orchestra of deals being struck between sips of champagne. Investors from Shanghai, Riyadh, Sao Paulo, journalists scribbling in moleskins, CEOs laughing too loudly, the hum of ambition almost drowning out the string quartet. Then, near the bar, she saw him, Julian, in a tailored tuxedo, hair slightly tousled, sipping from a glass of neat bourbon. He caught sight of her and froze. "Layla," he said, stepping forward. You look different, she teased. He smiled. No, exactly like you should have always been seen. His words landed deep. For a moment, they stood in silence, the crowd swirling around them like a tide parting. You really wore the dress, he said. I really wore the name, too. She replied, Al-Masri on the seating chart. Good, he said, voice lower now. It belongs there. She was about to respond when a sharp voice interrupted. Well, Ms. Al-Masri, Diana Cordell, board member, power broker, and someone whose name came with a reputation for making or breaking internal careers with a single word. Layla turned calmly. Ms. Cordell. Diana glanced at Julian, then back at Layla. We've been watching your rise with interest. We, the board. You've shaken things up. I hope in the right direction. Diana's eyes gleamed. Time will tell. And with that, she walked away. Julian exhaled. That was something. Welcome to the spotlight, Layla murmured. Hours later, after the speeches and the toasts and the endless swirl of small talk, Julian found her on the balcony overlooking Fifth Avenue. The city sparkled beneath them like a promise and a warning. He stood beside her, silent. Finally, she spoke. This is what I dreamed about when I was 20, she said. Except in the dream, I always walked in with someone. I wasn't alone. You're not alone now, Julian said. She looked at him. Aren't I? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he asked softly, what are we doing? Layla. She blinked. Professionally, no, he said, eyes steady. Us. She felt the walls rise in her chest, the ones built from years of disappointment, heartbreak, and careful survival. The walls that whispered, don't ruin this. Don't need too much. Don't want what might leave. I don't know, she said honestly. This past year, I've built myself from ash. I can't afford to fall for a man who might see me as a moment instead of a movement. Julian stepped closer. I see you as both. Her voice was barely a whisper. And what if this doesn't survive the power shifts, the press, the politics? Then we fight for it like we fight for the deals, he said, with clarity, with respect, without pretending it's not real. Layla's breath caught. Then, don't make me guess, she said. Julian took her hand. I'm not guessing, Layla. I want this. You. With whatever pace and strength you need. She didn't say yes, she didn't say no, but she didn't pull away either. And in the language of warriors and survivors, that meant everything. Inside the ballroom, another toast rang out. But outside, under a cold Manhattan sky, two people stood quietly, not as boss and employee, not as mentor and prodigy, but as equals in a world that rarely made space for such things. And somewhere deep in Layla's chest, a door shed locked long ago began to ease open. Not all the way, but just enough for possibility to step inside. 1 year later, Layla Al-Masri stood at the head of a sunlit conference room in Doha, Qatar. The skyline shimmered behind her sleek, modern towers reaching skyward from ancient earth. But inside this room, the only thing rising faster than the heat was the energy. A team of women sat around the table, executives from Cairo, Riyadh, Lagos, and Mumbai. Some wore suits, others brightly patterned abayas. All of them were here for one reason Layla had called them, because she'd made a promise first to herself, then to every woman who ever whispered, maybe one day. That day was today. I'm not interested in being the exception. Layla said, I want to multiply access, multiply fluency, multiply power, silence, then applause. These women weren't just recruits. They were seeds. Back in New York, Hayes Holdings looked different, too. The once overwhelmingly male Western leadership team now included women of color, immigrants, and second-chance professionals brought on not because of charity, but because Layla had made their value visible. She led the Global Culture Integration Division, an entire vertical she architected from scratch. Her team translated not just words, but meaning-bridging boardroom logic with cultural literacy across 4 continents. Julian still CEO, still strategic, still the person who knew how to build empires. But now, he built beside her. Their relationship was private, not hidden. Respect was the cornerstone, not power. They lived in separate apartments 3 blocks apart and met for coffee at a quiet Turkish cafe most mornings. Neither rushed anything. They didn't need to. They had built trust before romance. Layla's apartment had changed. Slightly bigger, light-filled. But on the wall, framed simply, was the handwritten list she had made on the plane home from Abu Dhabi. Things I will no longer apologize for next to it. Her father's Quran and her mother's pressed rosewood rosaria reminder that duality was not conflict, but completeness. On her desk was a stack of incoming internship applications for the Al-Masri Fellowship, a program she launched for young women from underserved backgrounds, those who spoke multiple languages, but whose resumes kept ending up at the bottom of the pile. They wouldn't be invisible anymore. At the next annual Hayes Gala, Layla wore emerald green, her mother's favorite color. When she walked in, Diana Cordell stood and offered a nod of genuine respect. Julian toasted her on stage. To the woman who didn't just earn her seat at the table, but taught the table how to speak in every language it had ignored. The room stood. Layla smiled, not because they finally saw her, but because she had always seen herself. 6 months later, Layla stood backstage at the World Economic Summit in Singapore, about to deliver a keynote titled, "Fluency is more than language, it's power." Her phone buzzed. A message from Sierra. "There's a girl I'm mentoring. Syrian Latina, speaks 4 languages, just interviewed at Atlantic Skies. She said you were the reason she applied." Layla smiled and replied, "Tell her she doesn't need to blend in. Tell her to speak. Someone will listen." Then she stepped onto the stage, and for 45 minutes, Layla Al-Masri did not just speak. She translated silence into strategy, pain into purpose, identity into infrastructure. And when she said, "I answered a phone call that wasn't meant for me, and it changed everything," the room leaned in, because they could all hear it now, the ring that called a cleaner to greatness. And they knew. The world had changed. Because she did. She was never just a cleaner. She was a linguist, a leader, a legacy in the making. But the world saw only her uniform, not her wisdom, not her story, not her name, until she spoke, until she refused to shrink, until she took a phone call that the world never meant for her and rewrote her future from the inside out. Layla Al-Masri's journey is not fiction for many. It's a mirror. There are thousands of women immigrants, single mothers, dreamers in silence working jobs that hide the brilliance they carry. All because of one thing, how we choose to see them. And worse, how some choose not to. So tonight, if Layla's story moved, you ask yourself, how many people in your daily life have you passed by without truly seeing? What genius have we overlooked because of an accent, a job title, or a name we didn't bother to pronounce? Let this be a call not just to action, but to awareness. Because every time we give someone the dignity of being seen for who they really are, we shift the world a little closer to fairness, to love, and to something more human. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told, please take a moment to like this video. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful, true-to-life stories that speak to the heart and challenge the system. Because the next voice we feature might be the one the world needs most. Thank you for watching. And remember, behind every uniform is a universe. Well, see you in the next story.